जय श्री कृष्ण चैतन्य प्रभु नित्यानंद श्री अद्वैत गदाधार श्रीवासादि गौर भक्त वृंदा। हरे कृष्णा कृष्ण कृष्ण हरे हरे, हरे राम 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 हरे हरे. Hare Krishna and welcome back. Today we are discussing verse number 58 of chapter number 2 from Srimad Bhagavad Gita. And in the previous verse, verse number 57, Krishna is talking about, or he is answering the question of Arjuna which was asked in verse number 54. So Arjuna asked a set of questions and he is talking about Stritapragya. So what are the symptoms of Stritapragya? How does he speak and what is his language? That was being answered in the previous verse. So speak or language means that how does he react to the actions of others, or in other words, when there is duality in the material world, how does he handle that? So Krishna in the verse number 57 is answering that by saying, one who is unaffected by whatever good or evil he may obtain. So good and evil, these are the two things that are part of this material world. They are going to come. So these are the dualities. So here we are seeing in this picture this season, which is like a spring season with a lot of flowers. Otherwise, and on the other side is the winter season or the fall season where all the leaves, so everything has become dark. So this is bright and light, and this is all dark. So these are duality conditions that happens in the material world. So how does the Stritapragya handles this? So he is unaffected by whatever good or evil he may obtain, neither praising it nor despising it. And it is firmly fixed in perfect knowledge. So that is Stritapragya. He neither praises the good thing nor he despises the evil. So he is basically equipoised towards duality. And now in today's verse, Krishna is answering Arjuna's third set of questions, which is how does he sit? So the sit means the mentality when senses are withdrawn from the sense object. How is he situated? That has been discussed here. And let's go to the verse, chapter 2, verse number 58. The Sanskrit is Yada samharte chayam kurmo angani sarvasaha indriyani indriyarthebhyas tasya pragya pratishtita. So the translation is, one who is able to withdraw his senses from the sense objects as the tortoise withdraws its limbs within the shell is firmly fixed in perfect consciousness. So Krishna is answering in this verse, he is describing how does that person sit. That was Arjuna's question. In other words, how does that person control his senses and what is his mentality? So let's read the Sanskrit and try to understand the Sanskrit words. So yada samaharte chayam, that is line A. So yada means when he winds up, he draws up. Samaharte means he draws up or draws in and winds up. Chayam. And the second line is kurmo angani sarvasaha. So kurmo means tortoise and angani means limbs. So kurmo is tortoise, angani is limbs, and sarvasaha means it is withdrawn, all to or drawn inwards. Similarly, Krishna is saying indriyani indriya arthebhyas. So the senses are withdrawn or drawn away from the sense objects. Tasya pragya pratishtita, that's the last line. So again, this is the Stritapragya who has been called over here as Pragya Pratishtita. In the previous verse also, Krishna is calling as Pragya Pratishtita. So the same person, Stritapragya, has been called here as Pragya Pratishtita. So who is Pragya Pratishtita? So one who draws in the senses from the sense object, just as the tortoise draws its limbs. So here in this picture we can see that the limbs of the tortoise is right now out in this picture, whereas here, that is other picture, it is withdrawn in. So similarly, the senses are, somebody who is a pragya pratisthita can withdraw his senses from the sense object based on how he wants to control it, right? So Krishna has not so far talked about himself in Bhagavad Gita. So this verse is applicable to any transcendentalist who is trying to practice any kind of yoga. Yoga means to connect with the Lord. So any karma yoga or jnana yoga or bhakti yoga, it's applicable to all of them. So this is applicable to the devotees who are practicing Krishna consciousness or bhakti yoga. So Krishna over here is talking to Arjuna that one should withdraw the senses from the material. And in Bhagavad Gita chapter 2 verse number 55, so this is 58th verse, in the 55th verse Krishna mentions that the symptoms of Sthitapagya, that was Arjuna's question, one of the question, or the first question was what is the symptoms of Sthitapagya. So in answering that, Krishna is saying that he is detached from the external and Sthitapagya is rejoicing in the internal. So how does one detach from the oneself from the external world or the material world? That is described here, and also this will be continued to describe in the next few verses. So Krishna is saying, as a tortoise has its limbs which are normally vulnerable, the tortoise will have the limbs, so these limbs of tortoise, they are very soft and vulnerable. But this shell of the tortoise is impenetrable. So when the tortoise limbs are withdrawn, like we see in this picture, they are withdrawn here, then it cannot be easily attacked by any predators. So similarly, we have our senses which are vulnerable, and they are our weak points. So normally in the war, what will happen is the enemy is always looking for the weak point of the opposing party. Like for example, in boxing, the strategy generally is hit where it hurts. Meaning, hit at that point where the opponent has some injury, so that you can quickly bring the person down. So this is same situation with us actually. In our situation also, the material world, in the material world, our senses are our weak points. The senses makes us vulnerable. So using senses, what do? We perceive the external world or things of the material world, and then we get enticed, or we get attracted, or we get also caught, and then we can be easily dragged down. So when we understand that our senses are our weakness, then what do? We become alert and we guard our weakness, or we guard our senses. Hence the senses have to be withdrawn inwards, just like a tortoise. So this is what Krishna is telling Arjuna over here. And then Srila Prabhupada in the purport, he is explaining that how a yogi controls his senses according to his plan. So let's read the purport. So here the verse says that one who is able to withdraw the senses from sense object is firmly fixed in perfect consciousness. And that has been explained by Krishna using the example of tortoise. So let's read the purport. So Srila Prabhupada says in the purport, what is the test of a yogi? The test of a yogi or a devotee or a self-realized soul, or somebody who is practicing or he wants to become transcendentalist, is that he is able to control the senses according to his plans. So we cannot actually withdraw our senses 24/7. All the time we cannot just withdraw our senses. we have to engage our senses also, but according to a plan. We must know when to engage senses and when not to engage senses. For example, speaking. So we can speak, but we can speak only when it is necessary, or we can talk when only it is necessary. When there is some mundane topics are going or discussions are going on, which is not in our favor, which will not help us to progress spiritually, then we should not participate in those kind of discussions. Right? Similarly with eating, we should eat enough, but not more than necessary. Similarly for seeing, the entire media is there to catch our attention, with so many different kinds of advertisement and so many things which will allure us. So we should not look into those things because, it's not required. We are not going to be able to buy everything which has been advertised. So why just, waste our time looking into those things which we are not going to get involved. So this is how we can withdraw. So in the next line, Srila Prabhupada says, what is the attitude of people in general? So most people, however, are servants of the senses and are thus directed by the dictation of the senses. So normally our senses are like radars. The radars are always looking, constantly scanning in this for enemies. Normally the radar will be scanning for enemies, but our senses are also like that. They are constantly looking out for things in this world, that what can give me happiness. So we are in lookout of danger actually, because we consider these things in this material world, the objects of the senses, as something to be enjoyed. But in reality, they are not favorable to us. They are not good for us for the long term, because it brings down our consciousness. So we are in lookout for danger, but we consider this danger to be favorable object for enjoyment. So Krishna is saying, look for happiness within. Samaharte chayam. So therefore Krishna is saying, withdraw the senses inward, so that we will not be caught in the entanglement of the sense objects. So people in general, they are not like that. What they do is they are controlled by the dictation of the senses. That is the answer to the question as to how a yogi is situated. So there is a comparison over here given from a yogi to a people in general, where yogi has a plan, whereas people in general, they don't have plan. They want to be controlled by the senses. So what happens when we look out for sense objects? So when we are bombarded with this objects of the senses, which are advertisements generally, buy this, do this, all kinds of advertisement are there. And when we see that, then we get tempted. And then a desire actually rises in our mind that I want to enjoy these things. Like for example, we see advertisement of buying a high-end phone. So we constantly watch those advertisements. Then there's a desire that comes in our mind that, this kind of objects are going to give me happiness. So when we constantly watch those things, advertisements, and our desires actually keeps on increasing. But we may not have capacity to buy all those things. So then what happens is that leads to frustration. And that generally will lead to frustration because we have limited amount of funds. And when we watch these things and we think, oh, these things are going to give me happiness. But what will happen, is it leads to frustration, because even if we think that if we have a lot of money, we cannot buy everything in this world. So this is how we get trapped by the material nature. Whereas, the yogis, they are able to control their senses according to their plans. So now Prabhupada says senses, they are just like venomous serpents. The senses are compared to venomous serpents. They want to act very loosely and without restriction. So yeah, senses are always going to push us, but we will have to have a plan to control our senses. And then Prabhupada says the analogy, how yogi should control. The yogi or the devotee must be very strong to control the serpent like snake charmer. So as the snake charmer controls the snake, similarly, the yogi or the devotee should be able to control the senses through some regulated way. He never allows them to act independently. He never allows the senses to be allowed independently. Now there are do's and don'ts in the scriptures. So that's what is mentioned here. So there are many injunctions in the revealed scriptures. Some of them are do's, some of them are do nots, and some of them are do's. So these are yama and niyamas. Then do this, and niyama means don't do that, Unless one is able to follow the do's and do nots, restricting oneself from sense enjoyment, it is not possible to be firmly fixed in Krishna consciousness. So this is a basic requirement for somebody who wants to be either Krishna conscious or they want to be Ashtanga yogi also. In Ashtanga yoga, the first two limbs, Ashtanga means 8 angas, 8 parts. So the first 2 part is yama niyama. So do's and don'ts. So in every yoga system, they have this process, the do's and don'ts. Do this, do this, do this, and don't do this, don't do this. So these are called as do's and don'ts. So these are restrictions. And these restrictions helps us to focus our mind from unnecessary things. So this is how if one follows those do's and then don'ts, then they can be firmly fixed in Krishna consciousness. So this is the flow kind of information explaining the Sitarpagya. He can withdraw the senses, and the senses are like venomous serpents, and he can control this object of senses, able to control the senses, and what is the best way of doing it. So that is explained here, and with the example of tortoise. So the analogy of tortoise, the best example set here is the tortoise. The tortoise can at any moment wind up its senses and exhibit them again at the time of particular purpose. So normally tortoise will do when it senses that there is a predator. The tortoise will pull back his limbs in the shell, because the shell is very hard, is kind of impenetrable, so the predator cannot attack. So similarly, we have to control our senses from the external world, from the temptations of the external world. Now Prabhupada gives the solution that how a Krishna conscious person controls his senses. So similarly, a devotee of Krishna consciousness, or similarly the senses of a Krishna conscious person, are used only for some particular purpose in the service of the Lord and are withdrawn otherwise. So a Krishna conscious person controls his senses by engaging his senses in service of Krishna. So when the senses are engaged, then they are not disturbed from the external world. Otherwise they will not do it. So they have a plan. So the plan is to engage in the service of the Lord. So over here also Krishna is telling Arjuna that Arjuna is being taught here to use his senses for the service of the Lord. Arjuna didn't want to fight. He wanted to get away from this fighting, the war. But Krishna is telling him that no, that is, you are a Kshatriya. So you have that fighting spirit. So you cannot withdraw from this war. And this is Dharma Yuddha. So instead of withdrawing from the war, you engage your senses for the service of the Lord. That means you fight for the Lord. So Arjuna is being taught here to use his senses for the service of the Lord instead of his own satisfaction. So Arjuna didn't want to fight when he had reasons and he gave those reasons in chapter number 1, but that was his own satisfaction. Here Krishna is saying that you fight for the satisfaction of Krishna. So keeping the senses always in the service of the Lord is the example set by the analogy of tortoise, who keeps the senses within. So keeping the senses within means engaging the senses in service of Krishna. And when you do that way, then actually you are not interacting with the external material world, because you are engaging your senses in the service of the Lord. So all the things which is discussed in this purport is put in this presentation format. So I think that's the end of the discussion. So thank you so much, and we will continue in the next verse, where this alone, what is described here, is actually not enough. Just withdrawing the senses is not enough. So what needs to be done is explained by Krishna in the next verse, that is 2.59. Very important verse. So we'll discuss that in next session. Thank you so much. Srila Prabhupada ki jai. Srimad Bhagavad Gita ki jai. Gaur Premanande Haribol.